Welcome to another episode of Code Breakers, the podcast that empowers you to overcome life's challenges and tap into your full potential. This week, we're joined by therapist and coach Annasara Purcell. She specializes in helping high-achieving professionals find less stress and more joy in their lives. So if that sounds good to you, you won't want to miss this. So wonderful to have you today. Thanks for taking the time. Before we jump in, would you like to do a brief introduction and share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. And first, just let me say, I'm really excited to be here too. I've really been looking forward to this. I love talking to other people who are as excited as I am about helping people. But My name's Annasara, and I am a therapist and a coach. I am based in downtown Seattle, and my focus is on helping high-achieving professionals find less stress and more joy in their lives. So before becoming a therapist, I was an attorney for 10 years. I learned a lot about high-stress environments from being an attorney, and so my passion is really helping people in those environments.
Lovely. Yes, definitely a similar focus area. So you mentioned previously being an attorney, but I know that we both also worked at Amazon. I'm curious, how did your experience there, but also your role prior, influence your decision to become a therapist and a coach?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would say that Amazon is like the other environments I've worked in. So I was at Amazon, and before that I was at a large law firm. In that it is a very fast-paced, high-stakes environment with a lot of very smart people with high standards.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think from my experience, those are some of the things that make it wonderful to work at. The work is super engaging. You have really smart colleagues. But it also, if we're being honest, can make it really stressful. You're surrounded by people who are also usually perfectionists. The work can be nonstop, and most of it feels really important. So I just became very aware of the importance of taking care of my mental health. I became aware of that early on. Unfortunately, I dealt with pretty severe anxiety right at the start of my legal career. And I was fortunate to find a great therapist who really changed my life by helping me really get that under control. And I just think that it's so important to have those strategies in place for protecting your mental health, because the job won't stop. And so it really is important to have strategies in place for you to be able to stop and do what's necessary to protect yourself. I'm curious how your time at Amazon impacted your path.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for sharing. But yeah, I think I share a similar sentiment where I think the environment at Amazon and being surrounded by so many wildly intelligent people with high standards, you're never the smartest person in the room, but you're always going to learn something from every conversation that you walk away from. So the speed with which you can grow as an individual, as a professional, as a teammate, anything that you want out of that, I absolutely am so appreciative for those aspects that I got out of that career. But similar to what you said, it also brings with it an added pressure. And I think that if you are somebody who already has anxiety before you go into Amazon or any other pre-existing conditions that can affect your ability to handle high stress environments, it just adds an extra layer of complexity to being able to maintain that balance, that clarity. And like you said, you need to be able to have those tools for when those moments do arise. And so, yeah, I guess for me, it's a little bit different because I started my healing journey while I was working at Amazon. And so in that way, I feel like it became a little bit intertwined, and it became a little bit harder for me to distinguish, is this stress and anxiety and all these internal aspects that I'm struggling with, are they coming from Amazon, or are they coming from the situations that, I'm unraveling from earlier in my life? And I think that just made it a little bit more challenging for me personally. But I mean, I had a ton of support, much like you did.
Mhm.
I was able to find a really fantastic therapist, um, and go through that process, and come out on the other side with a lot of clarity of not only what tools work for me to be able to maintain a high degree of composure, even in stressful environments, but
Mhm.
then I gained clarity on like, what do I really want to do with my life? And that's where the coaching came in for me.
Totally. I think that idea you raised that it's hard to tell what's the environment and it's hard to tell what's internal is a super common one. Because
Really? Yeah.
one of the challenges about really busy environments and environments with a lot of external stressors is it just becomes, I think, that much more difficult to take time to listen to what's going on in, on with you internally. And
Yeah.
being able to sort of tell, is this just an external thing that will be fixed if I change circumstance, or is there something deeper in me that I need to work on before I'm really going to feel fulfilled, is such
Yeah.
an important part of knowing where to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you just said about how it makes it harder to listen to kind of that internal voice of where is this coming from. I put a quote on my phone tool, you remember phone tool,
Hmm.
that said, you should meditate every day for 20 minutes. Unless you're busy, then you should meditate for an hour. And
Yes.
I felt like that was so perfect,
Yeah.
especially for Amazon, because we are all always so busy and there's always something on our to do list, more to do. And there's that internalized pressure that a lot of folks at Amazon have themselves from being high achievers, type A. But then
Yeah.
there's the external pressure. But I think you're absolutely right. The more, and this became one of those tools that I had to really lean on, was making
Mm.
sure that I took time in the morning to center myself. And that
Hmm.
was meditation for me. And
Yeah.
that's what allowed me to distinguish, like, is this, where do I need to go from here? What is this teaching me? What is it highlighting for me? Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
I'm so curious, like, what what led you to choose to go down this path, not just with therapy, but pursue therapy and coaching as a dual
Mhm.
practice? And maybe how do you define coaching and distinguish between the two? Yeah.
Yeah, all good questions that I get asked a lot. I think a lot of people are
Yeah.
curious as to why I did both. So to me, a coach is first and foremost like a thought partner that works with a
Mhm.
client to help them
Absolutely.
identify like what their most fulfilling life looks like and what's standing between them and that life, and strategize about how to remove the barriers that are standing between them and fulfillment. So a coach is all of
Yeah.
those things. A therapist, I think, should also be that sort of thought partner. But on top of that, therapists are healers. Like therapists
Yeah.
really engage in the act of helping clients go deep within themselves to heal past traumas, limiting beliefs, the kinds of wounds from our past that make it difficult for us to move forward. And so I
Totally.
conceive of both practices as involving thought partnership, but
Yeah.
therapy having an additional focus on healing, which doesn't mean that coaching can't result in healing. I think, like, the way I conceive of it is that when people live more authentically and they live in alignment with their vision and their values, healing comes from that. Um, but I view it as in coaching, kind of the healing comes from the change. And in
Okay.
therapy, the change comes from the healing.
That's a really beautiful way to put it.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
I love that. Yeah, no, I really love that. And I think that it's really beautiful that you've chosen to pursue both practices so that you can provide what's needed for your client in that moment. And I think that's really unique. I can tell you there have been days where I went to my therapist, but I would have rather had conversations that I felt were maybe a little bit more forward looking than
Hmm.
perhaps digging into the past. And
Hmm.
I'm curious if you've had similar experiences. Like, I guess I probably know some people who they could use some healing in their
Hmm.
lives, but the idea of going back to the past and digging things up or going through therapy is a little bit scarier, maybe,
Mhm.
than the idea of kind of taking the reality of the situation for what it is and looking forward. Do you come across that with high achieving clients pretty frequently?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think um I do think it's scary to go back to the past and kind of look at hard situations you've been through and think about healing them. But more than finding it scary, what I find with high achieving clients is it's almost like people think they're being whiny if
Oh,
there's some
interesting.
experience from their past that they haven't fully let go of. Particularly, I think with high achieving individuals who have done well, and so they externally appear to be doing fine. They have a roof over their heads, they're not worried about putting food on the table. With all the chaos and trauma that's happening in the world, I find a lot of people have some level of shame about saying, this bullying incident when I was 12, like, still impacts me. This
Yeah.
act of being excluded when I was 9, I still feel that little kid inside me sometimes. And
Yeah.
it makes me sad because I wish I could convey at scale how normal that is. Like, how
Yeah.
much we all remain impacted by traumatic incidents from our past until we do the work of healing them. And I use the word trauma intentionally, but also with some hesitation, because I think what I also see is people don't want to call things like bullying trauma unless it was really
Yeah.
extreme. People think of trauma as, extreme incidents of violence or near death experiences. And particularly for children, that's just not true.
Yeah.
Incidents of exclusion, incidents of being made to feel inferior really have deep psychological impacts on kids. And healing
Absolutely.
them can bring so much relief, but people don't they feel like they should be strong enough that they shouldn't have to go back and deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's so fascinating to me. Um, the strong enough
Mm,
and kind of the minimization of our own experiences. And I
mhm,
think one of the things I learned about trauma in my own healing journey was that it really is more about our ability to, with that event, it is
mhm,
exceeding our nervous system's capacity to process
mhm,
it.
mhm,
And that can depend on a multitude of things. That just is
mhm,
dependent on your own lived experiences, your own life, your own exposure. And I think that that factor of it being beyond our ability to understand what's happening in that moment and maybe
mhm.
make meaning out of it or make sense out of it, that goes beyond this means that I'm deficient in some way. Because I feel like that's kind of where it tends to go back to.
Absolutely. I think a lot of those traumatic events do lead to feelings of being deficient. And I think to what you're saying is people with our adult rational brains, we
Yeah,
look back at events from childhood and think, oh, that shouldn't be that big of a deal. But at the time, we weren't
yeah,
experiencing it with our adult rational brain. We were experiencing it with our much younger brain. And I guess when you look at kind of the evolutionary psychology of it, for kids, it makes
yeah,
sense that being excluded feels so scary because kids,
yeah,
they can't survive on their own.
yeah,
They don't have the resources, and they know that. And so it makes perfect sense that feeling like you might get kind of cut from the herd feels so scary and overwhelms the nervous system, like you said.
yeah, yeah. Well, and it's interesting too to think about the interconnectedness of our childhood experiences and then what we experience in work or in work settings and how we
Mhm.
respond to those.
Mhm.
So like having kind of a core wound related to being excluded in childhood
Mhm.
and then entering up in a work environment where perhaps you end up feeling excluded in one way or another. I can imagine that leads to exasperated stress levels
Mhm.
and all kinds of other things. And is
Mhm.
that when you feel like folks are finally ready to come to you and consider coaching or therapy, or when do you see folks make that pivot?
It's a really good question, and it's so different from person to person. I
Yeah,
think, and so much depends on kind of what culture people were raised with around self-care and therapy, because some people just
absolutely.
sort of approach it as part of their mental health regimen, and it doesn't need a
Yeah,
specific precipitating event. But I think others, I think a lot come to either therapy or coaching just when things start to feel really not sustainable. When
mhm,
they start to feel like I just can't keep doing this the way I'm doing it for that much longer. Um, and they just really
mhm.
realize that something needs to change. And often are
Yeah,
not sure what it is,
yeah,
but just really feeling like something needs to be different in their life than what it is right now. I'm curious
yeah,
what you find about when people are ready to come to coaching.
yeah, absolutely. It's usually a catalyst for change of some sort, for
Yeah.
sure. Um, but I don't have the therapist aspect of it. Like, I'm looking at partnering with folks who are looking at leadership and transformation coaching, and so with
Mm-hmm.
transformation, like, my focus is change,
Mm-hmm.
and the scale of change that folks are going through really depends. It could be
Mm-hmm.
navigating a job change, it could be
Mm-hmm.
navigating a divorce, like,
Mm-hmm.
it could range from anything. But I think I really liked what you said earlier about coaching, and therapy as well, but it relates to my understanding of the difference between coaching and therapy. And coaching is partnership with an individual on a creative and thought-provoking journey to help them achieve their maximum levels of success and goals,
Mm-hmm.
live in alignment, live in
Mm-hmm.
accordance with their values. Um, and then the therapy piece is more of like needing to kind of unravel in my opinion, unravel the pieces that are a couple of layers deep
Mm-hmm.
that maybe folks aren't aware of, that are
Mm-hmm.
perhaps holding them back in one way or another. Um, and that's where I guess the overlap kind of goes, that you have to be a little bit careful with is in coaching, you want to increase the individual's level of awareness. You want to increase their level of awareness of their thought process, the values that matter to them, their beliefs. But oftentimes, a lot of those things come back to our core early experiences.
Yeah.
And so I'm so fascinated with your ability to be able to navigate between those two disciplines, as needed for your clients. Because in my position, I can bring my own
Mm-hmm.
lived experiences and empathy to that
Yeah.
conversation,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't have that level of clinical training that a
Mm-hmm.
therapist would to
Mm-hmm.
really help resolve, um, anxiety, depression, some of
Mm-hmm.
those things that I think, to your point, people are ready for change when they're on the
Mm-hmm.
cusp of what's not working and
Mm-hmm.
burnout, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
that's the next step is I'm trying not to burn out here.
Yes, absolutely.
And what you said earlier too about alignment plays such a pivotal role in that. I believe
Mm-hmm.
alignment plays such a massive role in burnout.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd be curious what your perception is with the environment, um, and how that can play a role in it as well.
Yeah. So first of all, I totally agree with you. I think alignment plays a big part of burnout, or plays a big role in it, as do our environments. It kind of goes back to that kind of two two levels of thinking that I was referring to earlier about like what's the environment and what's coming from inside. Because I do think that
Yeah.
certain environments are just going to burn you out if you are in them long enough and you're not careful. Our
Yeah.
nervous systems just aren't designed to be in fight or flight mode all the time. And in some
Yeah.
environments, that ends up being how people function. And so, just on like a very basic level, like your adrenal glands will burn out and stop functioning over time. And
Yeah.
so, it's important to really carefully think about what environment you're cultivating, what stressors you're taking in your life, and are you giving your nervous system enough time to reset and not just be in a constant state of panic's probably a strong word, but hyperactivity. Are you
Yeah.
taking
Yeah.
rest?
Absolutely.
Um, But then on top of that, where I think the alignment really comes in is living inauthentically is tiring. And it's something
Yeah.
that people don't really realize how tiring it is until they stop doing it. I know from my own experience at the beginning of my legal career, I felt this need to present as much tougher than is authentic for me because I kind of thought that's what a litigator should be. Um,
Yeah.
and once I was able to let that go and kind of show up as my more authentic, friendly, empathetic self, um, I got a lot less tired. Just like I wasn't doing a different number of activities day to day, but I was less exhausted because I wasn't, wearing a mask essentially and
Exactly.
filtering
Yeah.
my actions through a lens of how I thought I should be. And so for me, coming into alignment with in that way really helped me avoid.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure that you see a lot of folks who are looking for tools, like we said earlier, to
Mhm.
avoid burnout or to recover from burnout, to better regulate their nervous system and give themselves that rest to kind of recover and recuperate.
Mhm.
Are there are there certain techniques or exercises or any tools that are kind of your go-tos that you encourage individuals to utilize if they're in high stress, high pressure work environments and they're struggling with this?
Yeah, there's a few. And I guess what I would just sort of say about them is I view these as kind of the universally helpful, limiting the amount of
Yeah,
external stress you're taking in to uh, be better able to focus on what's important tools. I think the alignment issues, as I'm sure you know, that really requires like an individualized discussion. But I think across the
yeah,
board, um, the number one thing I encourage like high stress professionals to do is to sleep with their phone in a different room and not look at their phone for as long as they can in the morning, and
mm,
to take breaks throughout the day where they are not looking at their phone. Um, and the reason for that is that I don't think people realize how much looking at their phone tends to set off a stress response in their body. A lot of people
yeah,
literally, while they're still in bed, will use their phone as their alarm. They'll reach over, they'll turn it off, and then like they see all their work emails or their Slack
yeah,
notifications. And so,
yeah,
like, before their feet have even hit the ground for the day, they're already in like a mild fight or flight response, feeling behind. And I
yeah,
think, especially, like that was one of the big challenges for me at Amazon is because I work with a global team, there's never a period
yeah,
of the day where there's not email coming in. So you wake up to the
yeah,
80 emails that have come in overnight and your nervous system is off to the races, being completely stressed
yeah,
out. So um, I think finding times throughout the day, and especially if you can start the day where your nervous system's not being fed a bunch of stressful inputs, is really
yeah,
key. And really hard in a society where people are as addicted to our phones as we are.
yeah.
What about for you?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love that you mentioned leaving your phone either in another room or staying off of it as long as you can during the morning, because I just recently started doing that.
Hmm.
Leaving, like, not, I don't leave my phone in another room. I'll admit
Hmm.
that it's still my alarm clock.
Yeah.
But I have started like doing my morning routine without my phone. So I'm pretty
Hmm.
good about meditating and journaling in the morning. But now
Hmm.
I'm doing that without access to my technology.
Hmm.
And it absolutely makes a huge difference. I
Hmm.
notice so much more energy throughout the day by just
Hmm.
starting my day with an hour
Hmm.
and a half by myself to get through, get my
Yeah.
mindset right, set my intentions for the day, and regulate my nervous system. And that's
Hmm.
really what I'm doing in the morning. So I think that's probably one of the top areas that I partner with folks on is nervous system
Hmm.
regulation. And
Hmm.
one of the most effective, easy to use, I guess, tools is
Yeah.
and I think to your point, like taking breaks throughout the day, if you have a couple of breaks throughout the day and you take 5 minutes to do a couple of like box breathing exercises.
Mm-hmm.
I find those are tremendously helpful. They're really popular. I don't
Yeah.
know how true it is, but I've heard that they came from like Navy SEALs or the
Mm-hmm.
military somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a really, really popular technique for kind of slowing your heart
Yeah.
rate and getting back into a regulated state. So
Yeah.
that is probably one of the talking about being trauma informed and being a
Mm-hmm.
trauma informed perspective to my
Mm-hmm.
coaching. Far different than therapy. It's more about the mindset and kind of the leadership approach that
Mm-hmm.
I take to my coaching conversations.
Yeah.
But nervous system regulation is a big one, and then parts work is a really big one. So I was
Mm-hmm.
going to ask you if you utilize IFS and parts work, because that I think is another one of the really fantastic tools that can just help us integrate those early childhood experiences with
Mm-hmm.
all the experiences that we've had since. And now, like you said, our adult logical brain can make a
Mm-hmm.
different meaning out of it. And I've found that parts work is so phenomenal in that regard. So I think those are probably two of the top.
And yes, I do. I love internal family systems therapy. It is one of the
Yeah.
modalities that when I read about it in therapy school, it was like a light bulb went off because it resonated so much. And I think um, it resonates with a lot of people because
Yeah.
I think one of the things that, again, when people are just trying to employ their rational brains, they have a hard time with is
Yeah.
like, why do I feel this conflict inside me? I'm saying I want to go
Yeah.
to the gym these days, and yet I find myself not doing it. I'm saying I'm going to do X, Y, or Z, and yet I find myself kind of self-sabotaging. And once you
Yeah.
recognize kind of the role that these different parts are playing in motivating your behavior, it becomes a lot easier to make sense of that internal
Yeah.
conflict. And I
Yeah,
also think that
absolutely.
for high achievers who are used to muscling through things, it's really a different way of thinking to be like, okay, this part of you don't like that you think of as bad for you.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to push it down, like what if we try to listen to it and see what's happening there?
Yeah.
It's really just a totally different way of thinking that I think some people are resistant to initially, but can create such positive change in people's lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I talk about parts work and stellate ganglion block, which I'm not sure if you've heard about, but I talk about those two as being probably the most pivotal for me. And
Okay.
speaking of environments and the
Mhm.
impact that our environments have on our ability to potentially head down a path towards
Mhm.
burnout, regulate, all of those things. Um, how often do you find that folks come to you because their environment or perhaps their manager and their direct leadership team is affecting their mental state?
This is such an interesting question because I think um, there's no question in my mind that like people's work environments affect their mental state all the time. And
Yeah,
in many cases, I think people's managers and leadership teams are creating really difficult to maintain either standards or working conditions, some combination of those. And um, I think sometimes people attribute difficulties to their work environment that actually are a combination of both the work environment and their own internal difficulties, particularly with
yeah,
people pleasing. Because if
absolutely.
people can't get comfortable with the idea of occasionally disappointing people, if people can't get comfortable with drawing boundaries, I think that problem is going to follow them from one workplace to another until
Yeah,
they develop that ability. And I don't mean to like blame the victim in these situations. There are absolutely toxic work environments that people cannot
yeah,
thrive in and they need to leave. Um,
yeah,
and what I often tell people is that you probably won't know for sure until you actually start trying to draw boundaries, and then we'll see whether
yeah,
they're respected or not. But if it's something that
yeah,
people aren't comfortable even trying because they're so afraid of disappointing people, um,
That's an
It can
issue
be hard to
too.
tell
Yeah.
whether your work environment is actually one that doesn't
Yeah.
respect boundaries or if you haven't drawn them.
Yeah, absolutely. You make such a good point. Two things can be true at once, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that I ask this question is because I studied leadership in graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fascinated by leadership just by
Mm-hmm.
itself. But obviously, having had my own experiences trying to recover from complex PTSD in a corporate environment, in a high
Mm-hmm.
pressure environment, I have become that much more aware of the potential impact that leaders can have on
Mm-hmm.
their teams.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where trauma-informed leadership has come from for me, is
Yes.
more of this awareness that leaders can bring to their teams and their environments and how they're engaging with their teams. Because, like you said, we can't be in fight or flight mode all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
if, as leaders, we can do our part to kind of be a
Mm-hmm.
buffer, if you
Mm-hmm.
will, to some of that external stress outside of our team, it can have
Mm-hmm.
such a monumental impact on our the folks who work for us, on their ability to do whatever they need to do outside of work, right? Like if that's therapy, coaching, whatever.
Yes.
I've found that that makes a tremendous difference. So that's where that question was coming from. But yeah, absolutely. I think two things can be true at once.
Yeah, and I think it's so true that, a leader really sets the tone for whether it's a work environment where people are encouraged to take care of themselves or not. And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
what good leaders, and certainly what trauma-informed leaders recognize, is that um, for the most part, especially, in environments where you need your employees to be thinking and strategizing, um, just always pushing your employees harder is not going to get you the result you want, because then they will be in this constant fight or flight mode and really not able to do their best work, because when we're in
Yeah.
that state, we're not as good at strategizing and thinking creatively. And so um, I think many organizations are getting better about this and trying to make
Yeah.
their leaders more trauma informed and aware of sort of the psychological realities that make it not effective just to push harder. And it
Right.
really, the importance of encouraging like people to be able to take care of themselves and show up authentically at work. But there's still a
Yeah.
long way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's good that we have folks that are both helping leaders develop those skills and
Hmm.
helping folks navigate those environments with where we are today. Like you said,
Hmm.
it's so important to be able to express and hold your own boundaries, especially in high pressure environments, like
Hmm.
we both know with Amazon.
Hmm.
So I think that makes a big difference. And that's something that we ourselves can do. What other advice might you have for leaders
Hmm.
on how they can really promote that and like lead by
Hmm.
example of, promoting your well-being and taking care of your
Hmm.
mental health and having that harmony?
So you actually said the key part of my answer in your question, which is leading by example, because what
Yeah.
I've really seen in talking to people about their professional stressors is that I think what a person's manager models is
Yeah.
probably more important than what they say. Because if, as a leader, you're saying to your team, it's okay to draw boundaries, it's okay to take vacation, it's okay to go offline at whatever time, but you're not doing any of that, I think what your team is going to think is like, yeah, HR is saying she has to say that, but obviously, like, that it can't be true that people who take their careers seriously can do that. And
Yeah.
so I think, and I don't mean to put like all the pressure for employee well-being on a manager's own self-care. I think that would be very unfair, but just to recognize that your team is looking at you in addition to listening to you.
Yeah.
And I will just say from my own experience, that's certainly been true. My manager at Amazon did a great job of modeling, like, when he was on vacation, he was unavailable. We had his cell phone for
Yeah.
emergencies, and that was all. And that made
Yeah.
me feel completely empowered to be unavailable when I was on vacation, which did
Totally.
so much good in terms of preventing my own. So,
Yeah.
so I just think the leading by example aspect is really key.
Yeah, I think it's so it's kind of funny, right? Because what immediately came up for me when you said that is like do as I say, not as I, or
Yeah.
wait, do as you're told, not as I say. I don't
Yeah.
remember the saying. This almost goes back to kind of that childhood. Like our parents are telling us one thing but doing another.
Yes.
And so even at such a young age, we probably learn like I need to do this, not that. And
Yeah.
then we do the same thing in our work environment.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Earlier, you had mentioned too, or I had asked kind of the difference between therapy and coaching.
Mhm.
Often I think of the difference between therapy and as coaching is a little bit more forward looking,
Mhm.
visioning, kind of what's next,
Mhm.
or how am I going to move forward from where I'm
Mhm.
at. And the therapy piece is a little bit more about like, where is this coming from?
Mhm.
But with all of that being said, like I'd be curious what misconceptions might be out there,
Mhm.
especially for high achieving folks
Mhm.
regarding either therapy or coaching and how you
Mhm.
address those.
The answer for therapy and coaching are really different. I think the biggest misconception about coaching that is out there, um, is that, uh, to put it bluntly, that like coaches are like therapists without training. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's when you hear people say, and I think that,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, coaching is not regulated the same way therapy is. It doesn't require a
Yep.
master's degree or a license. But I think that for good coaches, they're not people who want to be therapists who didn't go to school. They're people who made a decision to pursue a different path to help people in a different way. And so,
Yeah.
uh, and so that's kind of the misconception I see about coaching, that I think the few coaches who are sort of trying to do therapy um, without the training have kind of created a negative perception that unfortunately impacts a lot of good coaches. Um,
Yeah.
and then in terms of therapy, what I see is just a misconception, I think, from its origins and it kind of being grounded in a more medical model, that therapy is something you only go to if there's something like wrong with your brain, if you have a mental disorder, which is, unfortunately kind of reinforced by the fact that if you want your insurance to pay for it, you do need a diagnosis.
Yeah.
But I really think of therapy. I mean, I think of both as ways to take care of yourself. And I think, I
Absolutely. Yeah.
really encourage people not to think of therapy as something that means that they're weak or that there's something wrong with them, but really the opposite, that there's someone who's taking care of themselves. And for high achievers in particular who want to perform at a high mental level, um, it just doesn't make sense to think you can do that without taking care of your mental health. We don't
Yeah.
expect elite athletes to perform without taking care of their physical health. And so, like, why would we expect people to perform at a high mental level without taking care of their mental health?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's so important. And I love this term. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but like mental fitness.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of one of the areas that I've been kind of trying to hone in on as well, is because of that misconception of like therapy means I have something wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of promoting like mental health, I've started utilizing the phrase mental fitness, but it really
Yeah.
is the same concept of
Yeah.
taking care of your mental well-being. And it is so
Mm-hmm.
important. And you make such a good point that we can't perform at our best if we're not regulated and if we're not in the right mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And I think therapy and coaching can both help you address the level of awareness that
Mm-hmm.
you have for yourself and
Mm-hmm.
the perception that you're bringing to your work, to your home, and then how that affects your relationships and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You brought up a really good point about the regulation between the two
Mm-hmm.
fields right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big part of the reason that I decided to move forward with the certification program I'm going through and get certified through ICF, because that is basically the regulation that we
Mm-hmm.
have. And because it's not well regulated, there are a lot of folks out there that don't have the right training, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion. But I love to hear that there's another commonality here, because in coaching, I'm learning the same thing. Like
Mm-hmm.
it is what the client wants. You're helping them discover what they want. You're not
Mm-hmm.
giving them answers and solutions necessarily. You're provoking their thought process
Yeah.
to get a couple layers deeper.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you have folks sign up completely separately.
Yeah.
You keep a clear boundary between the
Yeah.
two, which makes sense.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, that's fascinating. I'm so intrigued by your decision to pursue both. And I love that you're able to switch between both
Well,
because
thank
it
you.
is, like you said, I think therapy is so healing and you don't have to
Mhm.
have any major um, diagnosis, if you will, for it to provide benefit.
Mhm.
Um, but I think that if therapy is not the route that you want to go,
Mhm.
then coaching has a lot of similarities, but it continues you on kind of that forward looking, like, where do I go
Mhm.
from here?
Mhm.
And you're able to work with folks in both capacities. So I think that's absolutely incredible.
Well, thank you. Well, I think for
Yeah.
many people, people are so busy, whether it's through therapy or coaching, just making the decision to prioritize their well-being in some way is itself really healing, and
Yeah,
can be one of
absolutely.
the most immediate benefits I see in people is just that when someone goes from feeling stuck to feeling like at least I'm taking some forward action,
Yeah.
regardless of what that is, it can help people feel much more empowered.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. That's so true, right? At least one small step in the right direction.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to thank you again for not only your time, but for sharing all of your perspectives with me and just having this chat around coaching and therapy, avoiding burnout, and sharing some wonderful tools, tips, and insights for folks to consider.
Of course.
If
Thank you
if
for
folks
having me.
wanted to work, yeah, absolutely. So if folks wanted to learn more about you or potentially work with you in the future, how do they get in touch?
Well, the good news is I'm the only person I know of with my name. So my website is just annasarapurcell.com, or if you Google Annasara Purcell, that should be the first thing that comes up. So just checking out my website is definitely the easiest way.
Awesome. We'll definitely have folks check that out. Thank you again, and we'll talk soon.
Great. Thank you so much.